generally we see patterns of illness, especially associated with travel. And it's the same kind of things that come up over and over again. And so once I gave it some real thought, I think the EpiPen is an add-on to the kit. And EpiPen is something that I really encourage everyone to have, like even if you don't have allergies. EpiPen is unfortunately secondary to Narcan is probably the number one most life-saving medication in the acute setting that we have. It's extremely time sensitive. And I always tell my patients that if you think you're having allergic reaction and if you think it's affecting anything more than just your skin, always take the dose of the EpiPen. All you have to lose is the cost of the EpiPen. We offer a 2-pack in the JetSet kit. Unfortunately, about 4 or 5 years ago, the company that makes EpiPens up the price of them quite a bit. So it is a very expensive medication. Like if you show up at CVS without insurance for a 2-pack, it's probably $800 to $1,000. We offer them in our kits as an add-on for $300 for 2 pens. So it's $150 per
really
pen,
good.
which I really keep that price as low as possible because it really is truly, a potentially life-saving medication. It's all about time to treat. Like it's all about time to treat. You can really stop the physiologic process, just stop it in its tracks if and when you give it early. So I always tell my patients, like if you think anything is happening, especially if there's a history of anaphylaxis, you give it. It's a super, super, super safe medication. Almost, we looked at this. People think, well, if it causes cardiac arrhythmias, it causes blood pressure to go up. It does increase heart rate and it does increase blood pressure, but it has been shown to be wildly safe, even in folks that have had recent heart attack and even in folks that have had recent issues with cardiac arrhythmias. You give it.
Yeah.
So give it. Because seeing someone succumb to anaphylaxis, which I have witnessed it's so terrible, and you just see it and you just know it was avoidable. And avoidable deaths are always some of the most difficult. So EpiPen is something that we felt was really absolutely necessary. One of our co-founders is an allergist immunologist, and it meant a lot to him that we offer that as well. EpiPens are something that really should be in every household, sort of like a smoke alarm, carbon monoxide, that kind of
Totally.
thing.
I actually really appreciate that because my daughter's allergic to eggs. We have an EpiPen, multiple EpiPens for her. But just in Costa Rica last week, I got stung by a bee, and I've been stung by a bee before, so I know I'm not allergic. But my mom was like, is that okay? Like, do you have reactions to it? And I was like, no, but like, what if I had just never been stung by a bee before and I just didn't know? And oftentimes people ask me like, what do I pack in my bags when I'm traveling long term with my kids? And I'm like, honestly, half the bag is medicine, because while yes, you can go to the urgent care, you can go to the pharmacy, you can go to whatever store, but when you need Tylenol for your kid, or when you need a Zofran because you've been over the toilet
Right.
for 12 hours, like you need it, and you're not going to want to get in the car and drive down the mountain and see the urgent care. Like, what do you say to the people who just say things like, oh, well, if I need it, I'll just figure it out, or I've been fine before, I don't need it? Like, what do you say to those folks who have
Yeah.
a little bit more of that like adventurous spirit and don't really
Yeah.
think they need the preparation?
So that reminded me of another quick story I'll share. So a few years back, we were in El Salvador, and as you probably know, stingrays were more common in the Pacific than most people might think, right? And like we know that when we walk out in the water, especially in warm water, especially in the Pacific, we shuffle our feet. And we shuffle our feet so that if there is a ray, we gently move it out of the way rather than stepping on it, because stepping on it is what causes them to go into self-defense mode and maybe hit someone with the stinger. So there was quite a few people surfing, and I had put on a snorkel just to see, just to look. It wasn't super clear, but it was clear enough. And there were hundreds of rays on a sandy bottom with 50 or 60 surfers above it. And I'm like, wow, no one's been stung. That's great. We go up after the day, we go up to shower, we come back down to the beach where we were like meeting there was like a van that brings people into town at night. And I see this unfortunate gentleman. He looked like he was about 30 years old, and he's holding his foot. And I see all these locals with matches, with lighters. And it looks as though they're trying to light his foot on fire. So I turned to my wife and I go, look, I might not know everything there is to know about acute care medicine, but nowhere in the book does it say, like, if this happens, like light the person's foot on fire. But I had an idea as to what was happening there, especially since I had just seen that the whole bottom of the ocean was covered in rays. And this kid was sweating and screaming in pain.
Oh.
So I went over to him and I said, and I said what happened. He basically jumped off the board and he landed right on the back of a ray and it got him in the foot. So the first thing I said to him was, please tell me you're not allergic to bees. He says, I'm deathly allergic to bees. And I said, and here we are, like kind of in, the
Oh
middle
my
of nowhere.
God.
And so I had an EpiPen in the room. So I said to my wife, I was like, can you please just go up and get it? Because at that point, right, the pain of the sting was not going to be fun, although we can get into how we handle that. But he did not have anaphylaxis. But if he began to show any signs of anaphylaxis, that EpiPen is the difference between life and death in an otherwise fairly innocuous situation, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about pain, treating the pain, which we didn't have any of that. Like, I don't travel with fentanyl. But what we did do was they had like a single stove. So what we, and this is good to know. So what we did was we boiled a pot of water. I took the boiling water and you do 50-50 boiling water, room temperature water, mix it because you're trying to get to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you put the foot in the water, right? And so that 125 degrees is hot enough to denature the protein of the venom, but not hot enough to burn the foot.
Wow.
And you can imagine that the pain is so great that putting foot in borderline scalding water felt so good to him, right? And 120 is pretty hot. You can't leave your foot in there for too long, but if you leave it in for about 5 to 10 minutes, and by the way, anytime I give medical advice, it's, this is just informal medical advice, but we were able to get his foot in this 120-degree water and the pain was gone in like 3 to 5 minutes. We had the EpiPen. Fortunately, he didn't need it. And I ended up giving him some of the meds I had with me to treat the pain. And needless to say, we were invited to a really nice dinner at his home the following night because he was doing fine at that point. But, he was traveling with a group of guys and they had nothing with them, right? They had no medicines of any kind with them. They had a lot of surf gear, but no meds and things like that. So, I'm sure he was the guy who probably was like, we'll be fine. Right. Not expecting to step on and get stung by a ray. So yeah, heat denatures venom from the ocean in general, right? So marine envenomations are very, very easily treated because the proteins denature quickly with heat. People always say like, if I get stung by a jellyfish, do I pee
Yeah.
on it? You can if you want to, but
If you're into that kind of thing.
yeah, but it probably actually doesn't make that big of a difference. The first thing I would do is look for the heat, is look for some hot water. And if you have a thermometer, the goal is 120 Fahrenheit to 125 Fahrenheit, a few minutes at a time, a few minutes in and out. And it's amazing. I've seen people who were absolutely just in astronomical amounts of pain and they're calm within like 3 to 5 minutes, especially if it's on an extremity, which it often
Yeah,
is.